I'd like to introduce our speaker. I've had the pleasure of knowing him for 2 years and working closely with him. But over to my right, Mark Rankin is an educational specialist with Red Cedar Solutions Group, professional services team. He served as a middle school math and science teacher as well as a middle school principal. He also served as the Dean of Education and Human Service for Baker College of Jackson, Michigan. He brings critical insights to the Orange Grove team from his experience working as an instructional specialist with the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators, with the Title I Accountability Grant working with high priority schools in Michigan. He co-chaired the data-driven decision-making and support partnership work groups. He also worked on the committee to develop and deliver the math content training for instructional coaches in Michigan. Mark received his BA in elementary education from Cornerstone University with minors in math and science, his MA in adult and continuing education from Michigan State University, and his PhD, he's a PhD candidate in educational leadership through Michigan State University. Please welcome Mark Rankin.
I have a microphone, but I don't think I need it. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, I'm not going to use it. If my voice tails off at all and you want me to turn it on, I can. How many of you guys are administrators? Administrators? Okay. How many of you guys are teachers? How many are other personnel? Other? What are some of your roles, just so I get an idea of what you are?
I'm working at the University of Michigan doing research on charter schools.
Wonderful. What do you do?
Dean of Students.
Dean of Students, excellent.
I'm a board president.
Board president, excellent.
Board president.
Board president, excellent. Good. Well, welcome. This is highly qualified versus highly effective. We've been doing a lot of work in the state of Michigan with the statewide system support as well as SIG schools, but we're also working with a variety of charter schools through our partnership with MAPSA. One of the things that I want to accomplish today is to talk about working earlier. What is the difference between highly qualified and highly effective? I want to leave you guys with some strategies to think about how can you ensure that you have highly effective teachers. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about some policies and programs and the effects that they have on schools. First thing I want you to think about is, can a teacher be highly qualified and yet not highly effective? Yes. Okay. What is the definition of a highly qualified teacher? Anyone? Someone's got to be brave. Someone knows the definition. Yes, ma'am.
State certified and endorsement is major minor.
Excellent. She said state certified, major, minor, or endorsement in the area that they're teaching. Very good. Now this next question, I work a lot with leadership teams at schools. I work a lot with administrative teams. This question here is really interesting because first thing I do is I ask people to get out a piece of paper and write down what is the definition of a highly effective teacher, and it's amazing the different types of answers I get. So once again, I'm going to call on you guys. I want this to be as interactive as possible. I know it's a larger group. But I want you to think about what are some of the things that we use as indicators for a highly effective teacher. Because I don't think we spend a lot of time having a shared understanding and common language with our staff about what a highly effective teacher actually looks like and or what they do in the classroom and how we know that they're highly effective. Yes?
Having an engaged student.
Have an engaged student. Okay, good, thank you. Others? Anyone? Yes? What?
You say that.
Okay, excellent. Have every student grow. Excellent. Anyone else? Okay. I want to get you guys thinking, so I'm going to ask a lot of questions just to get you guys thinking about some things. I'd really like your input as much as possible. I think the more input we have, the more rich the conversation and the more meaningful the session will be. Yes, go ahead, Pat.
Getting to know your students.
Getting to know your
Know your
students.
students as individuals and not as faces in the class.
Excellent. Did you have something over here?
Just using data to drive instruction.
Okay, and what does that look like in a classroom? If I can take it the next step further, how do we use data to drive instruction?
What was one example of each one of the
Excellent, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Having all the skill sets to be able to address diverse situations in the classroom, while also keeping an eye on prize, teaching, get those objectives done.
Excellent, perfect, thank you. Take a look at this next slide. If 80% of your students scored 80% or above on a particular assessment that you're using in your classroom or grade level or district, would you consider that successful? Why or why not? Way in the back.
Hey, anytime, if 80% of your students in a district score 80% or higher, it wouldn't be perfect, but I think you could consider that to be successful. I think you can say that if that's what you were accomplished, that no doubt you experienced some success in what you were trying to accomplish. To piggyback on what my man said, is that you met some objectives. So therefore, you're successful. I don't think it's not perfection, but you were successful.
Perfect. Anyone else? Yes.
I would wonder what the assessment is.
Good question. Would it depend if it was a common assessment that was developed by a teacher, or if it was like a performance series test, or whether it was NWEA or MEAT?
Right.
What is the assessment? Okay, good. Yes.
For me, it would depend where the kids started. So if we started off at the year with 80% already being successful, it making grow, that would be it's a red flag for me. Or I would also wonder where are those 20% of kids and what we can do to get them to that successful.
Excellent. And you said you meant objectives, so some of it depends on what your goal is. If you start at 50%, you get your students up to 80%, definitely success. But if you start at 80%, you're still at 80%, you have no growth, so that may not be success. This is some of the types of things I want to talk about. A lot of times we need to define what success looks like. We use words effective, we use words successful, but we never articulate and or have a common language as to what it means in our particular school. In one grade level, this could be success. In the very next grade level, it may not be success. You could have fourth graders who start at 50% and get up 80%, that's success. But if you have fifth graders who start at 80%, they're still only at 80%, it may not be success. So even within the same school, it could have different meanings depending on where your students started. Excellent. Take a look at this. School A versus School B. Which school do you think is most successful and why? Sure. Absolutely. One school has an 80% proficiency, the other school has a 90% proficiency, the state average is 75%. Which school would you rather be in?
That's ambiguous.
What?
That's ambiguous.
Ambiguous. Why?
Well, School B could have had 95% the year before. They went down.
Excellent.
School
So
A
what
might
do
have
we
had
need?
50%. They went up 30%.
More data. Okay, excellent. So if we take a look at more data, and I now tell you that here are the different levels. Does this look a little bit different?
Yes.
A little bit different. Now which school would you rather be in? A. Okay. But once again, we want more data because even if A was higher the year before and went down, we still may not consider that success if they went down. So we still want more data, correct? Now what if I tell you that School A had 400 students, School B had 1,000 students. So now we're looking at the students who are not proficient. A lot of times we're so focused on proficiency, we lose sight of the students who are not proficient. So from the perspective or lens of a parent, even if your school is 90% proficient, if you're one of the students who are not proficient, how would you view that school? Okay,
Not
so,
reachable.
so once again, we're changing the different perspectives or the different lens. Now Now let's take a look at this. Which teacher is more effective? This is a unit test. Typically administrators give unit tests. From an administrator, just administrators, from the administrator's perspective, which teacher do you think is more effective and why?
Well, they're gonna think that teacher A is more effective because she has a higher class average.
They're going to think that, aren't they? Typically. Now, how many of you guys, and this is a rhetorical question, so if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, but how many of your teachers, your staff, your schools actually give a pretest? Couple? Okay. The interesting thing is best practice says to use a pretest. Why would we want to use a pretest? Anybody? Yes? So you know what the students know, so you know prior knowledge, so you can build upon that. What do we call it when we build, taking our students from point A to point B, and we build upon our instruction within a unit? What do we call it? Scaffolding. Excellent. We can't scaffold our instruction unless we know what the prior knowledge of students is. But if we also know what the individual needs of our students are, now we can do something with each daily lesson based on the individual needs of our students. And what is that called? Differentiation. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to pass this out real quick, and I want you guys just to take a look at this, talk about it with your neighbor or whatever, and then I want to ask you a couple more questions real quick. Okay, a real experience that I had in school, I challenged the teachers to give a pretest one time because they said they weren't giving a pretest. We talked about best practice. The teacher actually gave a pretest. Real example, 3 students scored 100%, 2 students scored 90, 2 students scored 80, 1 student scored 70, and 4 students scored 60. Sat down with the teacher after pretest to go over the data, to talk about so what, now what are we going to do with this data? The teacher said, Mark, holy crap, if this was a post-test, I'd be celebrating what the students had learned. However, in actuality, they wouldn't have learned a dang thing. And I never would have known it. I would have wasted 4 weeks on this instruction and never knew that the students already knew. So I need to rethink how I'm going to teach this unit. I need to rethink how I'm going to scaffold the unit. I need to rethink how I'm going to differentiate. I need to rethink the activities. I need to rethink my cooperative groups. The power that went into the pre-assessment and the success that the teacher had afterwards was phenomenal. But yet, every school I go into, the majority of them, 95%, I ask how many of you guys use pre-assessments? People don't do it. And yet we know it's best practice. We talk all the time, or most people I talk to talk about we want to scaffold, we want to differentiate. We don't know how to scaffold, we don't know how to differentiate. The problem is, if you don't have a pre-test, if you don't know where your students are at, you can't scaffold and you can't differentiate. So first thing we need to do is find out where our students are at. If we know where our students are at, then we can come up with individual academic plans and we can actually put things in place. There's a lot of power in pre-assessments. So now that we have this information, and a lot of times administrators don't have this information, all they get is the post-test. But if you take a look at the pre-test, you take a look at the student growth, wow, now as an administrator, what am I doing? Okay? Now once again, we're talking about teacher effectiveness. Okay? We're talking about highly effective processes or systems in school. And yet when we go in and we talk about this isn't rocket science. Okay? A lot of the stuff is best practice, it's common sense, and yet most schools are not implementing it in their buildings. And the question is why? If you truly want to be highly effective, first let's define it, let's decide what it looks like, but then let's put systems and processes in place to ensure that we can get there. Another one, I find this quite a bit. This has to do with grades. Have a lot of teachers, 90% of their students get A's and B's. Okay, looks really good. Principal thinks they're doing a great job. But another teacher, 90% is getting B's and C's. Which teacher's more effective? Typically, people's gonna say teacher A. But now if we take a look at a little bit more information, once again, data talks. So once again, I go into a lot of schools, I talk to teachers, they say our students are doing great. I'm like, great, where's the data that shows that your students are doing great? They pull out their grade books, it's A's and B's. But then I take a look at the performance series test, Scantron test, or I take a look at NWEA test and 80% of the students are below grade level. And then take a look at MEP and 60-70% of the students are proficient on the MEP. How can 90% of students be getting A's and B's at that grade level if 80% are below grade level and 30% are not even proficient on the MEP? How many of you guys know what the MEP cutoff last year was for third grade math? The percent correct. Percent correct for math, third grade.
Isn't it 300? Or you guys for the scale for 300?
The scale score was 300, but I'm talking about the percent correct. Percent correct. Anyone? Nope. A lot lower. 33%. 33. 15 years ago, it was 75%. 3 out of 4. Last year, it's 33% for third grade math. For fourth grade math, it was 28%. Okay? To be level 1, which was advanced, percent correct was 50% last year. They're talking about raising the cutoff this year to 56% for proficiency. That means if you go back and take a look at your level 1 last year, that's going to be about what your proficiency is this year if the state goes ahead and raises that bar on the cutoff score. But what they're trying to do is make it so it's more closely related to norm reference tests like the NAEP or the Scantron or NWEA. But a lot of schools have 80, 40, 50% of students below grade level. So MEP scores are going to go way down this year. So once again, a lot of schools take a look at MEP to determine whether their teachers are effective or not. Okay, MEP is a criterion reference test. MEP does not measure growth over time. Okay, if you're using Scantron or if you're using NWA in your buildings, then you can measure growth over time. You also can tell whether or not a student starts at 6% and ends up at 18%. They still may be in the bottom quartile, and they still may be below grade level, but that's a phenomenal amount of growth. So there's expected growth, there's moderate growth, and then there's exceptional growth. And you as a district, you as a school, you as a leadership team should talk about what does that look like with our students so that we know whether or not our students are or are not making appropriate amount of growth. Yes?
A lot of times, well, what I've noticed is that they may assess a student at the third grade this year, and they may be at the level 2. They may be at level 2. And then next year they go to the fourth grade, and they may drop down to level 3, and they say the student declined, but they're being rated on different criteria. So I don't understand how they make that assessment that they made a decline when it's not the same content they're being graded on.
All they're doing is making a rational judgment that they were proficient one year and they're not proficient next year, or they were in one level one year and a different level the next year. So they're just comparing levels, but that's a criterion reference test that's measuring different criteria for each grade level. So it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges.
Oh, so that's not a valid assessment then?
It's a generalized statement. If a student was level 1, now they're level 2, or a student was level 2, now they're level 3, you can say that they went backwards, but it's two different tests measuring two different sets of skills. Yes.
I was, in doing this, just recently the state changed the cut scores. And so schools that have been, say, 80% proficient, now all of a sudden, based on the new cut scores, they're down to like 11%.
Right.
I mean, we're looking at drastic percent changes.
Correct.
You know, so how are those tests going to now reflect what the child really is truly proficient at? Where, you know, one year, you know, you got 85% proficient in math,
Yep.
you know, 72% proficient in English and reading comprehension. And now all of a sudden the new cut scores, and now they're at 11%, 10%. You know, it kind of says that what are the teachers? I mean, you've got to put teacher A and teacher B. I mean, that is extremely disheartening.
Absolutely.
For our teachers that are doing phenomenal jobs, and now all of a sudden, you know, you've got these schools that were high performance, and now you're looking at these cut scores and they're like,
Off the map.
they're just off the map completely.
Well, and I think that's part of what I want to get through this session, because I know that a lot of teachers are going to feel demoralized when they see some of the beat scores. And what I'm going to challenge you guys to do is not rely just on beat scores. A lot of times when we work with schools, we talk about BP and autopsy data. If you're in 5th grade, you're testing 4th grade skills, which are a year old. By the time you get the data back, those students are going to 6th grade, so now they're 2 years past. So it's autopsy. However, with MEAP, what you can do is you can take a look at where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. You can do a trend analysis over time, and that's indicative of your curriculum instruction. If you see gaps each year over a 3-year period, you need to have conversations with your staff about where is it introduced, where is it reinforced, where is it mastered, how are we assessing? Sometimes we do a Glick unwrapping exercises with teachers, and what we find is there's a disconnect because teachers are covering the material, but if students aren't learning it, there's a disconnect between teaching and learning. What we find a lot of times is teachers are teaching it at a knowledge and understanding level in Bloom's taxonomy, and you read the Glick, and it's actually talking about synthesizing, comparing, and contrasting, which are higher level thinking skills. The other thing, I'm math and science, so I work with a lot of teachers in math. A lot of elementary teachers are not math majors or minors, okay? You only need 2 math classes in order to be elementary certified. You only need 2 science classes to be elementary certified. I teach math for elementary school teachers at the college level. 95% of my students are female and 95% are ELA or social studies. I do a basic math test. Most of them don't do well. And I hear comments like, I hate math. I've never been good at math. That's why I didn't go into math. I don't want to deal with math. As an elementary teacher, you have to deal with math. One of the Glicks talks about multiplication, division, fractions, percents. And when we take a look at students' preparedness for middle school, students are not doing well in fractions and percents. We take a look at MEAP results. Students do great on multiplication, division, horrible in fractions and percents. You talk to teachers, and it's because they're teaching one way. If you teach one way in math, you're going to hit about 50% of your students. If you use 2 methodologies, you're going to hit another 25% or about 75% of your students. If you use 3 methodologies, you're going to hit another 15%. That's still only 90% of your students. So there's still going to be 10% where you got to find the key to their success or their interest. But if you're not using 3 methodologies, you're missing half your students in regards to math. And yes, most elementary math teachers don't feel comfortable teaching more than one way. So when I do observations in elementary math classrooms, I see one method of teaching math, typically. They're not using a variety of methodologies. So once again, talking about teacher effectiveness, where's the expertise? If you're in a K-8 building or even a K-12 building, where's the expertise for math within your system K-8 or K-12? It's your middle school and high school, because they have to be math major or minor. They have to have an endorsement in math. And a lot of times, we don't give opportunity for middle school teachers to talk to elementary teachers or vice versa. And yet, that can really build capacity and expertise of our whole staff. Just one example. Okay? Any other questions in regards to that? Yes?
I was just going to comment, we dealt that same problem. One of the things we did was very, very simple, but just started giving all our teacher applicants a simple math. Can you yourself do fractions and decimals? You got a lot of gamut. So unfortunately, it makes the hiring decision a little more difficult, but it makes the instruction harder.
And I would challenge you to take it a step further, because I tell my students that just because you can do the math doesn't necessarily mean you can teach the math. There's a lot of math experts out there that are not great teachers, and teaching math is a lot different than knowing math. A lot of people know how to get the answer, okay? It cracks me up when I go in the classroom and they're teaching fractions and they say, just flip and multiply. And the student says, why? Because that's how you get the right answer. Just trust me. Just do it and you'll get the right answer. Student wants to internalize the concept, the process, the why, the how. Teacher can't explain it, so they say, just trust me. That's what you do. You just flip and multiply. we're doing a disservice to students when we don't explain and we don't show and we don't have examples that we can actually demonstrate why and how math works. So the beauty of math is it's concrete. 2 plus 2 is going to equal 4 every day of the week. Okay? And if we teach students and they understand how and why it works, they're going to do much better on any type of assessment you give them, whether it's a criterion reference test or a norm reference test. Yes, way in the back.
But with knowing that information, why do they still continue to have the homeroom teacher teach all of the subjects, whereas the elementary students probably should just be going to a math teacher, since that's the struggle? I don't understand still why the homeroom teacher teaches everything, especially for the teacher that blatantly states, I don't like math.
That's a great question, and I'll tell you, there are some districts that are getting a math major and minor to teach math to all the students, and a science major and minor to teach science to all the students, just for that reason, okay? Sometimes it's a resource issue, sometimes it's a money issue, sometimes, how many of you guys, let me ask you a question, how many of you guys have heard of Einstein's quote, the greatest form of insanity? Who can quote that for me real quick? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Educators are the worst offenders of that.
Yeah.
We do the same thing over and over and over, and we hope and pray and cross our fingers that we get different results. If it's not working, we need to take a look at what we can do differently. And yet we continue doing the same thing over and over, and it's with that traditional elementary schedule. Okay? If your math scores are really poorly, you need to either A, get professional development for your teachers and build that capacity and expertise, or you need to take a look at how can we do this differently with our staff to more effectively meet the needs of our students. Yeah.
I think one problem is that you may know that change is needed, but being able to really pinpoint where is the disconnect, what is the problem that is causing the children not to succeed? Is it the teaching? Is it the delivery system? Is it the materials? You know, what exactly is it? And for us, I think that's the biggest issue, so that knowing where the change needs to be made.
Absolutely. How many of you guys use Performance Series Scantron test, or how many of you guys use NWTA? Most of you. Okay. How many of you guys have seen the expected growth for students on those tests? Okay. So you guys use a test, and now once again I'm being critical, so shoe fits wear. I don't mean to offend anyone. But you're using a test to measure growth, and yet you're not articulating or communicating with your staff as to what the expected growth is for a student. So once again, we could actually set targets for our teachers and talk about what is the minimum expected growth for a student at the 3rd grade level in reading or 4th grade level for math. We could actually talk about more than a year's worth of growth. Why would we want to talk about more than a year's worth of growth? Anyone? We always talk about a year's worth of growth for a year's worth of instruction. Why would we want to talk about more than a year's worth of growth?
Because you have to take into effect of where the child's base starts from.
Take it from where the student's base starts from. Okay.
Right.
Anyone else? Close the gap on what?
Where they started, where they are, between students in different places, demographically, race, gender, disadvantaged.
Change over time. Okay, the state of Michigan is actually saying a year's worth of growth for a year's worth of instruction is not sufficient, not acceptable for students who are below grade level. If a student is 1 grade below grade level, they want to see a minimum of 1.3 years worth of growth. If a student is 2 or more years below grade level, they want to see 1.5 years worth of growth. We're not even communicating with their staff what a year's worth of growth looks like. I'll tell you what, you want to blow teachers' minds, start talking about 1.3 years worth of growth or 1.5 years worth of growth. Now, it can be done, but it can't be done in the traditional classroom. There's several factors that have to be in place. Number one, we need to know where our students are at. We need to know what their strengths and weaknesses are. We also need to come up with targeted and focused instruction. We call it individual academic plans. We need to know specifically where is the student lacking. If I'm teaching 5th grade, I have to have a paradigm shift, because no longer can I think that I'm teaching 30 fifth graders, fifth grade skills,
Right.
I need to think that I'm teaching 30 individuals fifth grade skills. And those individuals are starting at different places. Some of them may be at second grade level, so I need to scaffold from second grade up to fifth grade. Some of them are at third grade, so I scaffold from third grade up, etc., etc. Works for any grade level you're in. How many of you guys are doing response to intervention? Okay. Response to intervention, tier 1, talks about having a rigorous and aligned curriculum. It talks about knowing what are the power glicks or mastery level concepts. When I walk into teachers' and I talk to them about what are the power glicks that you're teaching in this unit, or what are the glicks you're teaching in this unit, you'd be surprised how many teachers cannot articulate that. If that's not something that you're having a conversation about, not something that the teachers are consciously aware about, then they can't hit that target. But the other thing it talks about is progress monitoring. Progress monitoring says, how do we know that if they started here and now they're here? That's where we get back to the pre and post test. It's pretty powerful when a teacher gives a test and their students are at 5th or 10th percentile. They get done with that unit, students are up to 65th percentile. Normally that would be really deflating for a teacher, but I can see teachers celebrating, I got 55% growth in this. I had a lot of success. Okay? Up here is a growth model chart. This is based on Scantron, but it measures growth over time. Some of you guys can't see this number, but what this says is 23% of the students were below average in the fall and are still below average in the spring. 18% were below average in the fall and still below average, but 9% moved down. 14% moved down, 5 and 5 moved down. Students are moving in the wrong direction. A lot of times all we see is at the beginning of the year we have 45% of the students below grade level, and at the end of the year we have 45% of our students below grade level, but we don't know which students moved where. What's really powerful is teachers want to click on this triangle right here that has 9 students, and they say, I want to know which students these are. They also want to click here and see which students are still below grade level. And when you have those conversations, now you're having different types of conversations because you're actually using data to inform instruction. This is another one that shows a lot of movement in both directions. These are actual results from schools. Now once again, we're not basing it on grades. Grades are arbitrary. I've seen students get B's in class because they did all their homework, they did extra credit, they participated, they're good students, but they fail all their assessments, they're not proficient, they're below grade level. I've also seen students get A's because they passed all their assessments but didn't do their homework, didn't do other stuff. So there's both ends of the spectrum. What we really want to know is, what is an effective teacher? What is effectiveness in our school? And I dare to say, I worked with some management companies. They have different expectations for their schools. So they may have 5 or 6 schools in the management company, but each school has different targets. Why would different schools have different targets? Different expectations from the same management company?
Based on area,
Based on area?
demographics.
Depending on what the students are struggling with.
Based on what the students are struggling. Where did you start? Okay, we really need to start with where are we at. Once we identify where we're at, then we can talk about where do we want to be. It goes back to what you said earlier. You know, 80% could be success if we start at 50 and our goal was 80%. But if we start at 80%, our goal is 90 and we're still only at 80%, we didn't meet our objective. So we may have done as well as our sister school, but we actually started higher and had less growth than our sister school. Does that make sense? Okay. This one here, the teachers started crying when they saw this. 46% of the students were well below average in the fall and also in the spring. But 28%, almost 2/3 of the students, moved out of that bottom quartile. Okay, 2/3 of the students moved out of the bottom quartile. This is more than a year's and a half worth of growth. 9% moved out of below average to above average. That's exactly 50% of the students who started at below average moved out of below average. 5% moved up to well above average, that's 50%. So 50% moved out of this range, 50% moved out of this range, about 40% moved out of that range. Okay? Now, even with the 46%, the teachers said, I want to see the students who did not get out of bottom quartile, because my goal is to have all my students out of bottom quartile. I would call that an idealistic goal, an admirable goal, probably not very realistic, but I'll tell you what, the quality, effective teachers have the high bars. If you don't set high bars, your students aren't going to achieve it. Okay? This teacher was ecstatic, but they wanted to see. What we found out is the average of the students that were in the bottom quartile at the beginning of the year was 8 percentile. The students who are still in the bottom quartile at the end of the year was 18 percentile. 10% growth for the students that were still there. And what she said? Next year, I know the person at the next grade level is going to get these students out of this bottom quartile. In 2 years, they're going to get all their students out of the bottom quartile. Now, this is exceptional. I don't see this typically, but this is what targeted and focused instruction can do. Now, this particular school had parallel blocks. They had math labs, they had reading labs, they had in-school tutoring, they had after-school tutoring, they had Title I focused instruction. They also had an RTI process, but everything was geared at what? Student. Individual student. It sounds cliche, but really when we see the biggest growth in achievement, it happens one student at a time. And the only way that a teacher really can have that power and that effect is if they know where those students are at, and then figure out how can we scaffold, how can we differentiate, how can we meet the needs of the student from where they're at to where they want them to be. That comes from shared leadership. We talk about building leadership a lot. I really push teacher leadership. The expertise of the people in the classroom, the teachers need to know what questions to ask. I talk to a lot of teachers quite a bit, and I say, Mark, I really don't know what I don't know. I mean, you're asking me to do stuff, and I've never been asked to do this before. And I'm like, this is best practice. You know, we talk about using data to inform instruction. Most teachers don't know how to do it. They're data rich, but information poor. So when you talk about using data to inform instruction, most teachers don't know how to do that. They don't know how to work backwards. All they know how to do is work with 5th grade skills. And we really need to work with cross-curricular type stuff in grade level, vertical and horizontal alignment. But then also, teachers don't know what questions to ask. A lot of times they're frustrated. So once again, we need to give opportunity for teachers to get together, share expertise, share experiences. Title I teachers, special ed teachers have a lot of great activities and resources. A lot of schools I work with are using Study Island or My Math Lab or BrainPop or Promethean boards or Achievement Series or Scantron, but it's all focused based on individual needs of students and coming up with individual academic plans. And really, that's where you see your huge growth over time. But each teacher also has a target. I mean, some of the schools I'm working with say, okay, here's the minimum expected growth for 3rd grade level. I want to see at least 25 of your students reach the minimum. Okay, that's basic. A year's worth of growth for a year's worth of instruction. But we want to see 50% of our students reach the moderate target. And we want 25% to reach that high standard, because we know we have a lot of students who are below grade level, and they should show phenomenal growth if we really focus on the individual needs of students. How do we know it's working? Most schools that I work with don't monitor what they have in place. Okay, we talk about monitoring and evaluation. The #1 reason why different interventions don't work in schools is because they're not implemented with fidelity. Why aren't they implemented with fidelity? Because we don't talk about the key factors. What does it look like? How do we know it when we see it? What are the indicators of success? And then what is the evidence that we're going to accept? And then come up with a common rubric. If we do that, then we have a shared understanding and a common language of what we're looking at when we walk in the classroom. It shouldn't matter if I walk in as a curriculum director, or someone else walks in as an administrator, or someone else walks in as a school improvement chair, or someone else walks in as a colleague. We're walking in that classroom and we're all looking for the same thing. We're all looking for the same evidence. Just like I say with student assessments, when we give an assessment to students, it should be a celebration of what they learn. When you do an observation in a teacher's classroom, it shouldn't be a gotcha or surprise moment. It should be a celebration that they're doing what they're doing, supposed to be doing.
Right.
I mean, I've had teachers, when I walk in the classroom for an observation, they know I'm coming in and I'm looking for certain stuff. They say, Mark, look at this, look at this, look at this. They're excited. Why are they excited? Because they know they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They know what I'm looking for. They know what rubric I'm using, and they hand me stuff. Okay? A lot of schools right now that we're working with are using Teachscape and using Danielson. You really need conversations about those rubrics as well. Because I sit down with the administrative team, and I ask the administrator, what does effective teaching look like? How do we know when we see it? What are the indicators of successful teaching? What is the evidence of successful teaching? I have 12 administrators in the room and I get 10 different answers. They're all over the board. If your administrators can't even articulate and define what it is, then there's no way your teachers are going to know what that is. So once again, it's bringing everyone together. It goes back to your vision and mission and your goals, and then have everyone on the same page and having a clear understanding of what we're working towards. A couple of examples. How many of you guys have used Reading Recovery in the past? A couple of people? Okay. Reading Recovery is a program. It costs $180,000 for a couple of teachers. They work with about 40 students. It's 50% effective, which is great success. But 50% of 40 is how much? 20. So you're being successful at 20 students and you're spending $180,000. After a couple of years, the district was not satisfied with that amount of success. They looked at other programs. They found another program that only cost $40,000. So they're saving $140,000 a year now. It worked with all third graders. It's only 25% effective, but 25% of 200 is 50. The district saved lots of money. They had a lot more success, and they're working with all their students. The other bad thing is just recently they came out with more studies on reading recovery and found out that students are quite successful when they're in reading recovery. When they get out of reading recovery, they digress. So a lot of times we put programs in place hoping that that's going to be the magic bullet and solve our problems. And a lot of times that's not necessarily the case. So we need to make smart and wise decisions. And sometimes this handicaps our teachers because they're expected to do all these different programs. I was in a school a little while ago and the teachers were really frustrated because they were being asked to do something and they weren't getting results. They spent over $250,000 training their staff and on resources and materials for their teachers. They weren't getting desired results. So they said, Mark, can you come in and take a look at what we're doing, work with our teachers and figure out why we're not getting the desired results. We think it's the teachers. The teachers aren't doing a good job. Teachers aren't implementing it right. You said before that #1 reason why programs don't work is because of the implementation of fidelity. So we think our teachers aren't doing a good job in the classroom. As soon as I walked in, I looked at their particular thing that they were doing. I had them go to national registries and What Works Clearinghouse. How many of you guys are familiar with national registries and What Works Clearinghouse? Okay. One of the resources that I'm going to give you guys is a list of 9 national registries with all sorts of research-based, evidence-based programs. I challenge you to go to those registries and take a look at what you're actually doing within your schools to find out what impact they're actually having. This particular school had a negative correlation. Anyone tell me what a negative correlation is? Negative correlation when you do a scientific research study. Anybody? Someone brave?
The presence of one lowers the results,
Okay.
basically.
You have a study group, then you have a control group. Study group gets the intervention. Control group does not. Negative correlation means that your control group does better than your study group. So they spent $250,000 on this intervention. Blame the teachers. Think about it. Teachers aren't doing it right. Teachers are doing it right, they get results. And yet all the research says that this particular intervention does not work. Okay? Now, there's a lot of interventions that are sort of the flavor of the month, but the correlation is only a 2% positive or 4% positive. That means you're only going to see a 2% growth or 4% growth. So you spend all sorts of money on that intervention, you expect huge results. All the research says there's not going to be huge results. You may get 2% or 4%, but you're not going to get 20 or 30%. okay? A lot of times we don't do our research with the interventions we're doing. The other thing that I find quite a bit, more does not mean better. What do I mean by that? One district has 6 different interventions in 4 years. Teachers are overwhelmed doing all sorts of stuff, and really, in this case, the teachers were not implementing it with fidelity. You walk in the classroom, you could see pieces and parcels of different things being implemented, but they were asking to do so much. It's sort of a hodgepodge of everything. It wasn't a clear, demonstrated intervention in this classroom. So I could see pieces of a lot of different interventions, but we talked about sometimes less is more. What I mean by that is it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. And what I've challenged a lot of schools to do is pick out one thing that's going to give them the biggest bang for the buck, drop all the other things. You could save hundreds of thousands of dollars in resource material by dropping other things. Have your staff focus on one thing. Have your conversations around what does it look like, how do we know it when we see it, what are the indicators of success, what are the evidence that we're going to accept, what is the rubric we're going to use, get everyone on the same page. 33% improvement in 1 year. Not by doing more, but by doing less. Okay? So once again, the teacher said, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. We know exactly what's expected of us. We know exactly what to do. We know exactly what they're going to look for. We know exactly what it looks like. And the teachers loved it. Huge success in 1 year, not by doing more, but by doing less. And sometimes, once again, we do a disservice to ourselves because we think the more things we throw at the wall, the more successful we'll be. It's really not that way. It's having confidence, knowing that what we are going to do is going to work, and then providing support to our staff who's actually making a difference in the classroom. And that's really when you get highly effective schools, is when all the staff is on the same page. They have a confidence that what they're going to do is going to work, and teachers know what's expected of them. And that's really through shared leadership, shared responsibility. We are responsible for quality instruction. We are responsible for increasing student achievement. We know what the targets are that's expected of us and what we need to hit. We have a shared understanding, and we have a common language. Okay? Sounds pretty simplistic, but it's amazing how effective it works in schools, because a lot of times you have people going in every different direction, and really it's getting everyone on one page that really can make a difference.
That focuses on accountability as well, doesn't it?
It can. A lot of schools, absolutely. She said it can focus on accountability as well. There's a little difference between effectiveness and accountability. Okay? I've seen a lot of schools where administrators do evaluations and they rate a teacher really, really high because the students are engaged, all the desks are in a row, students are on task, it's really quiet, really orderly. They rate a teacher really low because it seems chaotic, students aren't in rows, it seems like students are all over the place, it doesn't seem like the teacher has control. We take a look at the data, the out-of-control classroom has twice the student achievement growth as a classroom that's orderly. So you have an administrator making a subjective opinion that they have a mental model, a lens of what they expect in the classroom, and they want to see it orderly, tidily, students in their roles engaged, so they rate that teacher really high without even taking effect. Student achievement, growth over time. And they mark down a teacher that has a classroom that is not a typical traditional classroom because they don't like the way it looks or how it feels, even though that teacher's getting phenomenal growth. So once again, what is teacher effectiveness? How do we know it when we see it? Conversations we need to have. And a lot of times, I as an administrator, when I work with people, I say what works for me may not work for you, and what works for you may not work for you. We can't expect all our classrooms to be cookie cutters. They can't all look the same, act the same, feel the same, because we have different personalities. We have different students. We have different relationships. So it really has to be varied, but when you're looking at data, the new teacher evaluation system says that 40% of your teacher evaluation has to be based on data, and it has to measure growth over time. It's important to have these conversations so there's no surprises for teachers. Teachers should be able to monitor their growth over time, and if they're doing pre and post assessments, they can show their growth for their students over each unit. They can show the growth of their students using NWEA or performance series as well. question? I'm sorry. It's a while ago.
Confused about that one slide where you paid instead of 180K, only 40K, but you have only 25% effectiveness. You use the larger sample for that one as the previous one and take that as a sign of something better. It makes sense to me.
Well, in the one, you only have to work with 40 students. Okay, reading recovery, each teacher works with 20 students each. So it's $180,000 for reading recovery, but you're limited to 40 students. It's 50% effective. So you're only working with a portion of your third graders, and it's a small portion. Usually you pick the lowest 40 students that get into reading recovery, but it's a limited amount of students who can participate. The other program is all third graders, so it's your whole third grade class, and the classroom teachers do it. So now instead of having specialized teachers working one-on-one and pull-out, it's a classroom approach. Not as effective, it's only 25% effective versus 50% effective, but you're working with a lot more students. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, great question. No, sorry about that. Yes?
Piggybacking off of this question, reading recovery is focused on first grade, where, can you share with us every program is, the first grade program you're referencing?
I'll talk to you about it later. That's great, because there's actually a couple different programs. I just threw that in as an example. So I don't advocate programs or policies, because there's a lot of different programs and policies. I mean, I know there's a lot of teacher evaluation systems out there with Reeves and Marzano and with Danielson. Some schools I'm working with is using Reeves, some of them are working Danielson, some of them working Marzano. To be honest with you, I really don't care what you use. What's important is that it is clearly stated and identified as far as what are the indicators, what is the evidence, having a shared understanding, a common language, and a clear rubric so that teachers are not surprised. The worst thing we can do is catch our teachers off guard. Okay, I'm running out of time. Go back to this performance management framework. This is really getting all the people involved, but I really want to focus on the foster a positive culture that's focused on student achievement. Once again, I indicated earlier that the biggest growth models has to do when you have targeted and focused instruction and when you focus on one student at a time, but it's really a paradigm shift. I put in the topic of this session that it's a paradigm shift to performance management, because out in the real world with factories, they have all sorts of quality controls. They have all sorts of performance management indicators, and yet in school, we don't typically have performance management indicators. And yet most charter schools are using some form of Achievement Series, Scantron, or NWA because of their management company or because of their authorizer. Where we're falling short is that data could be powerful for our teachers as far as coming up with learning objectives, knowledge, and skills, but we don't use it that way typically. I've even challenged schools to communicate with parents and community differently. Think about this. Typically, how do you guys communicate to parents throughout the year? Report cards, progress reports, parent-teacher conferences. Okay. That's typical. Typical. What some schools are starting to do is talk about college readiness. Talk about no excuses. How many of you guys are in no excuses school or a college readiness school? Some of you? Okay. What does that actually mean? A lot of times we throw out words, but we don't really back it up with action. So now what they're doing is when they get that fall PST score, they print out the learning objectives and they say, here's the knowledge and skills that your students demonstrated that they have. Here's the knowledge and skills your students has not demonstrated. Therefore, we're going to be working with your student on these knowledge and skills during parallel block, lab, tutoring session, whatever. But we're going to be focused on these because in order for your students to be successful at this grade level, they need these foundational knowledge and skills. When you create units that are based on pre and post assessments with power glyphs, you can actually say, we're learning this in this unit this month or this 6 weeks. Next 6 weeks, we're spending time in this unit. Here are the power glyphs. At the end of the unit, send home. Here's the power glyphs your student has mastered. here is the Power Glitz your student has not mastered. We're going to continue working with your student either through remediation, reteaching, or tutoring, because our vision, our philosophy, our mission and goal is that 100% of our students will master 100% of the concepts for this grade level. Why? So that students are adequately prepared to be successful at the next grade level, but more importantly and ultimately, so students are prepared with knowledge and skills to be successful at the high school and ultimately to go on to college if they so choose. So now we're communicating to parents in regards to knowledge and skills. So you typically give 3 Scantron series tests a year. You can send home 3 letters a year. Typically you have 8 or 9 units a year. You can send home 10 or 20 letters based on units. Mastery level concepts. So now we're not communicating grades, arbitrary percents, concrete foundational knowledge and skills. Now you have parents engaged, and parents understand knowledge and skills because they want their students to be successful in high school. They want their students to be able to go on college. But we don't communicate whether they're prepared for high school or prepared for college. We communicate grade. And think about when we send home progress reports saying that your student is an A-B student, and yet they're not proficient on the MEP and they're below grade level on performance series. Now what message are we sending to parents? It's backwards. We're not communicating the right things to the parents. Yes?
Yeah, forgive me, I'm not a full-time educator, but some of the words you throw around like power glitz and no excuse school, can you just explain?
Sure. Power glitz are mastery level glitz, and typically they're the foundational. Typically at a grade level, GLIT stands for grade level content expectations. You may have 40 or 44 content expectations at a grade level. Of those 44, about 15 to 20 are power glitz. Those are the ones that are most important because those are building blocks for the next grade level. So we call them power glitz. You want the students to master all 44, but the power glitz are the essential. They are critical for success at the next grade level. Okay? No Excuses University or college prep. When I walk in schools and I see vision statements and stuff, they talk about this is a no excuses school. All students will be prepared for high school, or all students will be college ready. Those are basically belief statements that the schools have, but there's a lot of schools who call themselves no excuses schools because they want their students being successful regardless of where they come in. So it's their belief statement, it's their philosophy or mission. Good question. Yes? That's a great question. They are defined, like if you guys use like Curriculum Crafter, or if you have certain authorizers have scope and sequence, they'll define what power glitz are. Typically they're similar, but I've seen some differences per grade level, depends on who comes up with the power glitz. But it's basically, if you take a look at the glitz across grade level, it's the glitz that are the foundational skills for the next grade level are typically the power glitz. Okay, does that help? Yeah. Now, here's another thing, and this is a little bit of a tangent, I wasn't going to go here today. I worked with a school who said they had a curriculum, okay? I said, write down all the units that you're doing, and write down all the glitz that you're teaching. My guess was that it was curriculum-based, textbook-based curriculum. Okay, they didn't have a written curriculum. First half of the year, they spent on chapters 1 through 4, had 3 glitz in it. Second half of the year, they spent on chapters 5 through 8, had 13 glitz in it. They were covering 16 glitz, chapters 1 through 8. The teachers were told, here's our curriculum, here's the textbook, and they went through chapters 1 through 8. See it time and time again. 44 glitz at that grade level. 22 of the 44 glitz were in chapters 10, 11, and 12, and the teachers never even knew it. Never even knew it. So talking about not having a clearly defined target, not having a clearly defined expectation. Now the reverse of that is covering all 44 glitz, but the student's not learning it, okay? Some teachers rush through the curriculum because I've got to get through this curriculum, I've got to cover everything, otherwise I'm not effective. Well, you can cover everything, but if your students aren't learning it, you're not effective, okay? There's a correlation between teaching and learning, and sometimes that gets lost in the hustle and bustle of every day. There comes a point in time where we have to move on, but even when we move on, we still have to circle back or spiral the curriculum or provide remediation or some additional academic support for students because we want 100% of our students to master 100% of the items. Otherwise, they're just going to get further. Does that make sense? Any other questions?
Just maybe quick, you mentioned 3 methodologies in mathematics, math, 3 methodologies. You get something more than that. Methodologies in math.
Right.
What are those?
Well, it's like using different examples or different story problems or manipulatives or different ways of illustrating the same type of a problem. A lot of times, most teachers will just do a mathematical sequence without explaining the how or the why. So you do a pictorial or you do an example or a methodology or manipulative or something to show the how and why of math. Okay? So it's more than, a lot of times you walk to math classes and middle school and high school teachers are horrible at this because that's the way they were taught. You spend first 10-15 minutes on what we did yesterday, going over yesterday's homework, 10-15 minutes on the new stuff, and then 10-15 minutes on homework for tomorrow or whatever. But they don't really go through a process of explaining how and why things work in math. Performance management framework. As a staff, really, this is the nuts and bolts of the whole presentation. You really need to talk about what is a highly effective school. How are we going to determine, how are we going to measure? What type of data sets are we going to use? What is expected minimum growth? What is a year's worth of instruction for a year's worth of growth? What is more than a year's worth of growth for a year's worth of instruction? And even though most of you guys use NWA or Scantron, you don't have those conversations. Therefore, teachers don't have targets that they can hit. They don't have measures along the way to see if they're hitting their benchmarks or the topics that the staff wants them to get. Shared understanding and common language. There should be no surprises for teachers. I talk to teachers all the time and they say, my administrator walks in, I have no idea what they're looking for. And I'm like, that's the worst type of leadership. It should be very clearly articulated what we're looking for. I work with a school who implemented Marzano's 9. How many of you guys are familiar with Marzano's 9? Okay. First quarter, they said, we're going to look at these 3. When I walk in the classroom, I'm looking for these 3. Here are the indicators. Here's the evidence. This is what I want to see. Second quarter, we're going to take a look at the next 3. Third quarter, next 3. Last quarter, we're going to take a look at all 9. Teachers were fully aware of what the administrators or anyone else walking in the building was looking for. Everyone was using the same rubric. There was no surprises. Questions to ask. What does it look like? How do we know it when we see it? What are the indicators? What is the evidence? You can use this for teacher effectiveness. You can use this for implementation of interventions. You can use this for any of your programs, Title I program. Worked with a school a couple months ago. We have a great Title I program. We feel really good about it. I'm like, that's great. Where's the data? Well, we really don't have any data, but you know what? We've been doing this for the last 2 or 3 years, and we've had a lot of success. I'm like, that's great. Let's sit down and let's take a look at the data. Now, mind you, the superintendent was there. Students who started in Title I at the beginning of the year, same students in Title I at the end of the year. Students below grade level at the beginning of the year, below grade level at the end of the year. So I asked the superintendent, how's that working for you? I know you feel good about it. I know your teachers feel good about it. What is your goal for this program? Because I don't see any change academically. I don't see the needle in regards to student learning moving at all. And in actuality, they weren't even getting a year's worth of growth or a year's worth of instruction. So the students were actually going backwards. Now, we did this for a 3-year period because they felt good about it. They implemented it 3 years ago. None of the 3 years showed any growth. So once again, we hope and pray, cross our fingers, and hope we get different results. But we keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And it's really about making a difference in regards to student achievement. Are we moving the needle in regards to student learning? Okay? In order to measure whether or not we're moving the needle in regards to student learning or making a difference in regards to student growth, we have to have clearly defined targets. We have to have clearly defined expectations. Okay? Pre and post test is a great way to show growth over time because you could have a teacher who's only getting their students at a 60% level, but their students are starting at a 5 or 10, they're getting 55, 60% growth every unit. That's a lot of growth. But if all you're looking at is the end result, you're going to think this teacher is horrible. 60%, 60%, 60%, this teacher isn't doing jack with these students. You know what? They're doing phenomenal work with these students. And now maybe you can build upon that and take them to the next level. But a lot of times we jump to conclusions. We jump to assessments without having all of the data or all the information. And that stems from not having a shared understanding and a common language. Okay. All the resources can be found at www.orangegroveschools.com. I printed out this. I want you to take a look at this. Some of you may have questions in regards to this before you leave. There is probably 20 different resources that are at this site. There's also the PowerPoint. There's an RTI process, RTI model. A lot of the resources that I put on there, I pulled from Learning by Doing before. Okay, there's a lot of processes that you can use in here. I tell schools a lot of times when I walk in, it's really interesting because I hear people say, well, our PLC time is on Friday, or our school improvement time is on Wednesday, or we do data on Tuesday, or we have our RTI process on Thursday. In actuality, if you're doing any one of those three systems or processes and you're doing them effectively, they should be seamless. They should be integrated. So when I walk in a meeting, I shouldn't be able to tell if you're having a continuous improvement meeting. Because what you do in continuous improvement, you talk about what is working, what isn't working, what do we need to change, what do we need to do differently. If I walk into a PLC meeting, what are we talking about in PLC? We're talking about effectiveness. We're talking about how is things going with our students, what's working, what's not working, what activities, what students need help, what students aren't being successful. If you walk into RTI, it's the same type of conversation. But really, it shouldn't be a point in time. It should be a part of your culture and part of your habit. It should be ingrained into the environment and fabric of your school, where teachers are continually talking about what are we doing well, what can we change, what can we increase. Am I meeting the needs of this student? Is the student learning what I need them to learn? And so a lot of times, you take a look at high-performing schools have these processes ingrained so deeply that you can't tell which meeting they're actually in, because all the meetings are having the same types of conversations. What's working, what's not working, what can we do better? How are we doing in regards to our student achievement? The red sheet that I just passed out is a starting point. I really believe that everything that I just talked about today in regards to highly effectiveness really starts with your vision, mission, belief statements. What is the goal you want for your students? Idealistically, it should be 100%. Okay, 100% of your students proficient on any assessment they take. Should be 100% of your students mastering 100% of the blitz. However, each teacher needs to understand a realistic goal. What I mean by that, if a student is at a 6th percentile at the beginning of the year, a year and a half worth of growth would be about a 12th percentile. If you get that student up to 18th percentile, that's almost 2 years worth of growth. That's phenomenal growth. It has to be celebrated. It has to be realized that this is phenomenal work, okay? We are dealt the cards that are given to us. Many of you guys have mobility issues. Many of you guys have minority students or economically disadvantaged students. You can't really set realistic goals unless you know where your students are at. And what I do with teachers and staff is you should have 3rd grade level goals. You should have 3rd grade classroom goals, but you should have 3rd grade student goals. And a lot of times when we talk about school improvement, it's a compliance issue. The I's are dotted, T's are crossed, but it's not truly a continuous improvement process where we're really working with our grade level, our classroom, and our students in setting goals. What would you expect to see? More growth out of a student who's at a 75th percentile, or more growth from a student who's at a 6th percentile? 6th percentile. There's a lot more opportunity. And yet a lot of times we set these arbitrary targets that we want to see 150 points worth of growth for the classroom. Does it make more sense to have a classroom goal, or does it make more sense to have individual student goals? And they can roll up into a classroom goal, which can roll up into a 3rd grade goal. But if you have 30 3rd grade teachers, You may have different goals for each one of your third grade teachers because they have different groups, different populations, different environments. So once again, I challenge you to really think about what is effectiveness, because we throw the word about, we banter it about quite a bit. We don't really spend a lot of time talking about what does it look like at our school? What does it mean for me as a teacher? What data are we going to use? Okay? Any questions? All right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.